Welcome to Ancient Relics Keeper, where forgotten civilizations, unexplained wonders, and ancient secrets come back to life. Ready to unravel the mystery? Let's begin the journey. Deep within the frozen soil of the Yukon, a discovery was made that opens a window into a lost world. A nearly perfect 50,000-year-old skull of a saber-toothed cat emerged from the ice. This isn't just a fossil. It's the key to understanding a brutal and magnificent Ice Age ecosystem. The story of our planet's deep past is written not in books but in bone. It is a history buried deep within the earth, locked away in layers of rock and ice, waiting for a fortunate accident or a patient search to bring it to light. To read this history, we must travel to one of the most wild and remote places on Earth, a land of vast wilderness, freezing temperatures, and legendary riches. Our journey takes us to the Yukon Territory in northern Canada, a place synonymous with the Great Klondike Gold Rush, a land that has drawn prospectors for over a century with the promise of gold. But in recent decades, the Yukon has begun to yield a different kind of treasure, one far more precious than any precious metal. It is a treasure of frozen bones, the perfectly preserved remains of a lost world, the world of the last ice age. And it is here, amidst the search for gold, that our story begins. It is the story of a single breathtaking discovery, a face from the permafrost, the face of one of the most iconic and terrifying predators that ever walked the earth. Our story starts not in a university laboratory or on a formal paleontological dig, but in the rugged and unforgiving landscape near Dawson City. This is the heart of the Klondike, a place where the history of the gold rush is still alive. Here, modern-day gold miners continue the tradition of their predecessors, but with far more powerful tools. Instead of simple pans and shovels, they now use heavy machinery and high-pressure water cannons to work the land. The gold they seek is not found in veins within hard rock, but as fine flakes and nuggets mixed into the ancient, frozen gravels that were deposited by rivers tens of thousands of years ago. To get to this pay dirt, the miners must first remove the thick layer of overlying frozen soil and silt, a permanently frozen layer of ground known as permafrost. The most efficient way to do this is through a process called hydraulic mining. They use massive water cannons like giant fire hoses to blast the frozen hillsides with powerful jets of water. The force of the water thaws and liquefies the permafrost, washing away the mud and silt in a process that is both brutally effective and dramatically messy. It was during one such operation that the discovery was made. A team of miners was blasting away at a frozen cliff face, a wall of dark, icy earth that had been locked in a deep freeze since the time of the mammoths. As the high-pressure water jet tore into the ancient soil, washing away millennia of accumulated silt in a torrent of mud, a strange object was dislodged. It tumbled down the muddy slope with the other rocks and debris. One of the miners, keeping a watchful eye on the slurry for any glint of gold, noticed something out of the place. It wasn't a rock. It had a strange symmetrical shape, and it was a pale creamy color that stood out against the dark mud. He shut down the water cannon and went to investigate. Pulling the object from the muck, he brushed it off and found himself staring into the face of a monster. It was a skull, but a skull unlike any animal he had ever seen. It was large, powerfully built, and from its upper jaw protruded two enormous, curved, dagger-like teeth. The miner, a man accustomed to the wilderness and its creatures, knew at once that this was something ancient and incredibly special. He carefully retrieved the fossil, recognizing that he had found a different kind of Yukon treasure. This wasn't the gold he was looking for, but he had the distinct feeling that it might be even more valuable. The skull was brought from the remote mining claim to Dawson City, and from there, word of the strange find quickly reached the network of paleontologists and heritage experts who work in the Yukon. The territory is a world-renowned hotspot for Ice Age fossils. The same permafrost that preserves the gold-bearing gravels also acts as a perfect natural freezer for the remains of the animals that once roamed the landscape. The bones and sometimes even the soft tissues like skin, muscle and hair of woolly mammoths, steppe bison, ancient horses, and giant beavers are found here with remarkable frequency. But even in a place famous for its Ice Age fossils, this new discovery caused an immediate stir. The experts who first examined the skull confirmed the miners' initial instincts. This was an extraordinary find. They identified it immediately as the skull of Smilodon fatalis, the creature known to popular culture as the saber-toothed tiger. The name is, of course, a little misleading. It was not a true tiger. It belonged to a completely separate, extinct lineage of cats called the Machaerodonts. But its fame is well-deserved. With its iconic blade-like fangs, Smilodon is one of the most famous and charismatic of all prehistoric animals, a symbol of the raw power and ferocity of the Ice Age. What made this particular discovery so scientifically important was its location. While Smilodon fossils are famous from more southerly locations, most notably the incredible treasure trove of the La Brea tar pits in Los Angeles, finding a saber-toothed cat this far north, in the subarctic environment of the Yukon, was exceptionally rare. Only a handful of fragmentary Smilodon remains had ever been found in the entire region of Alaska and the Yukon, which during the Ice Age formed a vast, unglaciated landmass known as Beringia. Most of those previous finds were just a single tooth or a broken piece of a limb bone. To find a nearly complete skull was unprecedented. It was like finding a single perfect Roman coin in a land where you previously only had rumors of Roman contact. This skull was hard, physical proof that these apex predators had not only lived in the far north but had likely thrived there. It immediately raised a host of new questions for scientists. How did they survive the harsh northern winters? What did they eat in this different environment? How did their range extend so far into the cold, treeless plains of the north? The skull was not just a beautiful fossil. It was a critical new data point that could help rewrite our understanding of this legendary predator's life and world. And the true value of this new data point was amplified by its almost unbelievable state of preservation. When a paleontologist finds a fossil, it is often a frustratingly incomplete affair. The bones may have been scattered by scavengers after the animal died. They may have been broken and crushed by the weight of rock layers over millions of years, or weathered and eroded by wind and water. To find a complete skeleton is rare. To find a perfect skull is the dream of a lifetime. The skull that emerged from the Yukon permafrost was just that, a dream fossil. The intense, year-round cold of the permafrost had acted as the perfect preservation medium. Instead of being slowly replaced by minerals in a process of petrification, the bone had been flash-frozen, locking it in time. This meant that the skull was not a fragile piece of rock. It was still essentially bone. Its condition was breathtaking. It was almost perfectly complete, with the delicate, paper-thin bones of the nasal cavity still intact. The jaw was strong, the teeth were firmly in their sockets, and most importantly, the two magnificent saber canines were present and unbroken. They were just as sharp and menacing as they had been on the day the animal died, some 50,000 years ago. This incredible level of preservation is what elevates a fossil from a simple museum curiosity to a priceless scientific treasure. Because the bone itself was preserved, and not just its mineralized impression, it still contained a wealth of biochemical information that would have been lost in a normal fossil. The microscopic structure of the bone was intact, allowing for detailed analysis of its growth patterns and strength. And most excitingly, it still contained residual organic material, including proteins like collagen. This meant that scientists could use advanced techniques like radiocarbon dating to determine a very precise age for the fossil. They could also analyze the stable isotopes, the chemical signatures locked within the collagen itself. This isotopic analysis could reveal incredible details about the animal's diet, its environment, and even its migration patterns. It's like finding a diary written in a chemical language. The skull was not just a silent, static object. It was a time capsule packed with data waiting to be read. The miner who pulled it from the mud had no way of knowing it at the time, but he had found one of the most scientifically important Ice Age fossils of the century. And now this priceless treasure had to begin the next stage of its long journey. Once the significance of the find was fully understood, a careful and delicate operation began. The skull was no longer just a curiosity. It was a fragile and irreplaceable piece of our planet's natural heritage. It had to be moved from the rugged wilderness of the Yukon to a state-of-the-art laboratory where it could be properly studied and preserved. The journey began with its careful extraction and initial cleaning by local paleontological staff. They had to ensure that the fossil was stabilized and protected from the modern environment. After surviving for 50 millennia in a frozen low-oxygen environment, sudden exposure to the warm, humid air of the modern world could cause it to dry out, crack, and degrade with shocking speed. The skull was carefully packed in a custom-built, padded container to protect it from vibration and shock during transport. Its journey took it from the remote mining fields, down the long, lonely highways of the north, and eventually onto a plain. Its final destination was the Canadian Museum of Nature in Ottawa, one of the premier research institutions in the world for Arctic paleontology. Here, the skull was handed over to a team of dedicated scientists, curators, and technicians. It was brought into a specialized laboratory with carefully controlled temperature and humidity. The real work could now begin. In the lab, the skull was subjected to a battery of tests and analyses that would have been unimaginable just a few decades ago. It was meticulously cleaned under microscopes, with technicians using tiny dental picks and soft brushes to remove the last stubborn remnants of the 50,000-year-old mud, grain by grain. It was scanned using high-resolution CT scanners, creating a detailed, three-dimensional digital model. This allowed scientists to look inside the skull without ever having to cut into it, to map the size and shape of its brain cavity, and to study the internal structure of the bones and teeth. Tiny samples of bone, no bigger than a grain of rice, were carefully drilled from an inconspicuous spot. These samples were then sent to specialized labs for radiocarbon dating and isotopic analysis. The results that came back were thrilling. The radiocarbon dating confirmed an age of around 50,000 years, placing the cat firmly in the middle of the last ice age, a period known as the Wisconsin glaciation. The isotopic analysis began to reveal the secrets of its diet and lifestyle. The face from the permafrost had arrived at its final resting place, no longer an anonymous object buried in the frozen earth, but a celebrity specimen in a world-class museum. It had completed its journey from a muddy hillside to the clean, bright lights of the laboratory. And now it was finally ready to tell its story, to give us a direct and unparalleled look into the anatomy of a killer and the lost world it once ruled. The journey of the Yukon skull, from the frozen mud of a gold mine to the sterile, climate-controlled environment of a museum laboratory, is a remarkable story in itself. But the true adventure begins now. With this perfectly preserved fossil in their hands, scientists can finally move beyond speculation and begin to reconstruct the life of this incredible animal. The skull is a biological blueprint, a set of instructions written in bone that tells us not just what this creature looked like, but how it lived, how it moved, and most importantly, how it killed. For decades, our image of the saber-toothed cat has been shaped more by cartoons and fantasy movies than by science. We picture a sleek, tiger-like creature, a fast and agile predator. But the story told by the bones is very different, and far more terrifying. We will now dissect this evidence, feature by feature, to build a scientifically accurate portrait of this apex predator. We will explore the anatomy of a killer, starting with the weapons that gave it its famous name. The first things that capture your attention, the features that define the very identity of this animal, are the two magnificent, lethal sabers. Protruding from the upper jaw of the Yukon skull are two enormous canine teeth, each one a masterpiece of natural engineering. They are long, curved, and flattened from side to side like a blade. In a large male smilodon, these teeth could reach over 7 inches in length, extending far below the lower jaw even when the mouth was closed. For a long time there was a great deal of debate about how these incredible teeth were actually used. Were they for display? A way for males to intimidate rivals and attract mates? Were they used for slashing like a pair of curved swords? Modern science, using advanced techniques like finite element analysis, the same kind of computer modeling used by engineers to test the strength of a bridge or an airplane wing, has given us a clear answer. The sabers were surprisingly fragile when subjected to side-to-side stress. If the cat tried to use them to slash at a struggling animal, or if they accidentally hit a thick bone, the teeth would have been at high risk of snapping. A predator that breaks its primary weapon is a predator that starves. So the sabers were not all-purpose tools. They were highly specialized weapons designed for a single specific purpose: to deliver a quick, precise, and catastrophic killing bite. They were not slashing blades. They were stabbing daggers. The flattened blade-like shape was perfect for slicing through flesh and blood vessels with minimal resistance, and the fine serrations found along the edges of many fossilized teeth would have made them even more efficient at cutting. The killing strategy of a Smilodon would have been unlike that of any living cat today. A modern lion or tiger often kills its prey through a long, suffocating bite to the throat, or by crushing the spine at the back of the neck. This can be a prolonged and violent struggle. Smilodon, on the other hand, was built for a much faster and more brutal kind of execution. The goal was to cause massive, rapid blood loss and shock. The target was almost certainly the soft, vulnerable underside of the prey's neck, the area containing the vital carotid artery and jugular vein. After using its immense physical strength to immobilize its victim, the saber-toothed cat would deliver a single, powerful stabbing bite, severing these major blood vessels. The prey would bleed out and go into shock within a matter of seconds. It was a brutally efficient killing method, a form of prehistoric surgery designed to dispatch the massive and dangerous animals of the Ice Age as quickly and safely as possible. The famous sabers were not just for show. They were the precision instruments of a highly specialized assassin. And this specialized killing tool was attached to a body that was equally unique and powerful. Our popular image of the saber-toothed cat is often one of grace and speed. We imagine a prehistoric version of a tiger or a leopard, a sleek and agile hunter running down its prey across the plains. But the story told by the complete skeletons found at sites like the La Brea tar pits paints a very different picture. When paleontologists reconstructed the body of Smilodon, they found a creature that was not built for speed at all. This was not the cheetah of the Ice Age, it was the bulldog. The skeleton of a saber-toothed cat reveals an animal that was incredibly robust and powerfully built. It was about the size of a modern African lion, but it was much heavier, with some estimates putting a large male at over 600 pounds, significantly bulkier than any living big cat. Its bones were thicker and denser. Its legs were relatively short and stout, particularly the forelimbs. The areas on the bones where muscles attached were massive and deeply scarred, indicating an immense musculature. The neck was incredibly thick and powerful, necessary to drive those huge sabers into its prey. The lower back was shorter and less flexible than that of a modern lion or tiger. All of these features point to an animal that was not designed for a long, high-speed chase. A cheetah, with its long, flexible spine and slender legs, is a running specialist. A Smilodon, with its rigid back and heavy build, would have been a poor long-distance runner. Instead, its body was a masterpiece of design for a different kind of hunting: ambush and overwhelming force. Smilodon was an ambush predator. It would have used stealth and cover, like tall grasses or rocky outcrops, to get as close as possible to its prey. The hunt would have culminated in a short, explosive burst of speed, a powerful charge to close the final distance. The goal was to make physical contact as quickly as possible. Once it hit its target, its powerful muscular forelimbs and heavy body would have come into play. It was built for grappling like a modern wrestler. It would have used its immense upper body strength to grab onto its prey, dig in with its sharp claws, and wrestle the animal to the ground. This physical, close-quarters struggle was a necessary prelude to the final bite. The delicate sabers could only be used safely once the prey was immobilized. A struggling, kicking animal like a giant bison or a young mammoth could easily have snapped the cat's precious fangs. A fatal accident for the hunter. So the powerful bear-like body was an essential part of the killing machine. It was the delivery system for the precision weapons in its mouth. This combination of brute strength and precise weaponry made Smilodon one of the most formidable predators the world has ever seen. And the final piece of this anatomical puzzle is how it actually delivered that famous bite. The mechanics of the killing bite were a masterpiece of evolution, a complex interplay between the skull, the jaw, and the neck muscles. The Yukon skull, in its perfect state of preservation, gives us an incredible insight into how this system worked. One of the most remarkable features revealed by the skull is the cat's incredible gape. To effectively use fangs that were over 7 inches long, the animal had to be able to open its mouth extremely wide. If it couldn't clear the tips of its lower canines, the sabers would be useless. Analysis of the jaw joint, a point on the skull called the glenoid fossa, shows that it was structured to allow the lower jaw to swing down to an astonishing degree. Scientists estimate that Smilodon could open its mouth to an angle of over 120 degrees. For comparison, a modern lion can only manage a gape of about 65 degrees. This phenomenal gape was an absolute necessity, a biomechanical solution to the problem of wielding such enormous teeth. Once the mouth was open, the killing bite itself was delivered not primarily by the power of the jaw muscles, as it is in modern cats, but by the immense power of the neck. The jaw muscles of Smilodon, while strong, were actually proportionally weaker than those of a lion. A lion uses the crushing power of its jaw to kill. Smilodon used a different technique. The back of its skull shows massive attachment points for incredibly powerful neck muscles. The killing strike was a downward thrust of the entire head, driven by the neck like a swift, powerful nod. The cat would have hooked its lower canines into the prey's hide to anchor its jaw, and then driven the upper sabers down into the throat with a single, devastating movement. It was less of a bite and more of a head-powered stab. This whole sequence, the ambush, the powerful charge, the wrestling takedown with the forelimbs, the wide gape, and the final neck-powered stab presents a picture of a highly specialized and sophisticated predator. It was a process honed by millions of years of evolution to be brutally effective against the giant herbivores of the Ice Age. Every part of its anatomy, from its stocky legs to the angle of its jaw joint, was perfectly adapted for this single deadly purpose. And there is one final fascinating piece of evidence that suggests this incredible hunter may not have worked alone. For a long time, the saber-toothed cat was imagined as a solitary hunter, a lone assassin stalking the Ice Age plains. But a growing body of evidence suggests a different and perhaps even more formidable possibility: that Smilodon was a social animal, hunting in cooperative groups, much like modern lions. The most compelling evidence for this comes from the La Brea tar pits in Los Angeles. Over the millennia, thousands of animals became trapped in the sticky natural asphalt that seeped to the surface there. Herbivores like bison and mammoths would get stuck, and their distress calls would attract predators, who would then also become trapped. The result is an incredible fossil treasure trove, a snapshot of an entire ecosystem. And what the paleontologists found at La Brea was a huge number of Smilodon fossils, far more than any other predator. The sheer number of individuals found together suggests that they may have been drawn to the tar pits as a group. Furthermore, many of the Smilodon fossils from La Brea show evidence of healed injuries. Scientists have found bones that were broken and then fully mended, and teeth that were worn down or diseased. A solitary predator with a serious injury like a broken leg would be unable to hunt and would quickly starve to death. The fact that so many of these animals survived such severe trauma strongly suggests that they were being cared for by other members of their group. A wounded cat could have been allowed to feed on the kills made by its pride mates while it recovered. This kind of supportive, social behavior is a hallmark of animals that live in cooperative family groups. Hunting in a pride would have been a massive advantage in the world of the Ice Age. While a single Smilodon was a powerful animal, tackling a fully grown adult giant ground sloth or a Columbian mammoth would have been an almost impossible and incredibly dangerous task. But a coordinated attack by a pride of saber-toothed cats would have been a different story. They could have worked together to isolate a young, old, or sick individual from a herd, to surround it and to overwhelm it. A social structure would have made them the undisputed top predators of their environment, capable of taking down the very largest and most dangerous prey. This social dimension adds the final layer to our portrait of this incredible animal. We are not just looking at a solitary killer. We are looking at a highly intelligent, cooperative, and powerful social predator, a member of a lethal family unit. The anatomy of the saber-toothed cat, as revealed by the Yukon skull and other fossils, shows us a creature far more complex and terrifying than we ever imagined. It was a perfect killing machine, an apex predator whose unique combination of brute strength, specialized weapons, and social cooperation allowed it to dominate the brutal world of the last Ice Age. We have reconstructed the saber-toothed cat from its bones, revealing the anatomy of a perfect killer. We understand its powerful body, its specialized saber teeth, and its brutally efficient hunting strategy. We have transformed it from a caricature into a real living, breathing predator. But an animal, no matter how magnificent, does not exist in a vacuum. It is a product of its environment, shaped by the world it lived in, the food it ate, and the other creatures it lived alongside. The perfectly preserved Yukon skull is more than just a blueprint for a single animal. It is a key, a special kind of time capsule that allows us to unlock the secrets of the entire lost world that this predator inhabited. By studying the chemical clues locked within its ancient bone, we can begin to reconstruct the ecosystem of the Ice Age Yukon. We can now use this skull to look beyond the predator itself and begin to paint a picture of the world it saw through its own eyes, a world of vast grasslands, giant herds, and fierce competitors. Our first step in rebuilding this lost world is to answer the most fundamental question for any predator. What was on the menu? For a long time, determining the diet of an extinct animal was a matter of educated guesswork. Paleontologists would look at the size and shape of a predator's teeth and make inferences. A big cat with big teeth likely ate big animals. But this was an indirect and often imprecise method. Today, thanks to the incredible preservation of fossils like the Yukon skull, we can do something that seems like science fiction. We can analyze the chemical signature of the animal's last meals, a signature that is permanently recorded in its bones. The science behind this is a field called stable isotope analysis. The basic principle is simple. You are what you eat. When an animal eats food, the chemical elements from that food like carbon and nitrogen are used to build its own body tissues, including the protein collagen in its bones. These elements come in different forms or isotopes, and the specific ratio of these isotopes varies depending on the type of plants at the bottom of the food chain. By taking a tiny sample of the bone collagen from the Yukon skull and analyzing its isotopic signature in a machine called a mass spectrometer, scientists can work their way back up the food chain. They can compare the chemical signature in the cat's bone to the signatures of the various herbivores that lived in the same environment, fossils of which have also been found in the Yukon permafrost. When scientists performed this analysis on the Yukon Smilodon, the results were crystal clear. The chemical signature in its bones was a strong match for the signatures found in the bones of large, grazing herbivores. Its primary food sources were the ancient horses and steppe bison that roamed the Yukon in vast herds. There was also some evidence that it may have hunted caribou. This was a crucial piece of information. It confirmed, with direct chemical evidence, that Smilodon was a specialist hunter of large prey. It wasn't a generalist that would eat anything it could catch. Its entire existence was tied to the great herds of the Ice Age. This specialization made it incredibly successful when its chosen prey was abundant, but as we will see later, it also made it incredibly vulnerable when that food source disappeared. The isotopic analysis also told us what it didn't eat. There was no chemical signature of marine animals, so it wasn't scavenging on beached whales. More interestingly, there was little to no signature of woolly mammoth. This might seem surprising, as mammoths were one of the most common large animals in the Yukon. It suggests that while a pride of saber-toothed cats might have been capable of tackling a young or sick mammoth, these colossal, dangerous animals were not a regular part of their diet. It was likely too risky. They preferred to stick to the more manageable, and far more numerous, herds of horses and bison. This detailed dietary information is a revelation. It allows us to move beyond simply calling Smilodon an apex predator, and to define its specific role, its ecological niche, with incredible precision. We now know with a high degree of certainty what this particular cat was eating in the weeks and months before it died some 50,000 years ago. It gives us a direct, tangible link to the food web of the past. We can now picture our Yukon cat, not as a generic monster, but as a real hunter, stalking the specific herds of wild horses and giant bison that populated its territory. And knowing what it ate is the first step to understanding the kind of world it needed to survive, a world that was vastly different from the Yukon of today. The fact that the Yukon was home to a thriving population of saber-toothed cats, as well as the vast herds of horses and bison they preyed upon, tells us something profound about the environment itself. The modern Yukon is a land of boreal forest and tundra, a landscape dominated by spruce trees, mosses, and shrubs. It is a beautiful but relatively low-productivity environment that cannot support large herds of grazing animals. But the world of our saber-toothed cat was completely different. The discovery of this top predator, and the grazers it depended on, is one of our most important pieces of evidence for the existence of a vast, lost ecosystem known as the Mammoth Steppe. The Mammoth Steppe was the most extensive biome on Earth during the last ice age. It was a cold, dry, grassy plain that stretched almost uninterrupted from Western Europe, across the entire breadth of Asia, across the Bering Land Bridge, which connected Siberia and Alaska at the time, and deep into North America. It was a world without forests. The climate was too cold and arid for trees to grow in any great number. Instead, the landscape was dominated by a rich and diverse carpet of highly nutritious grasses, herbs, and wildflowers. This seems like a paradox. How could a cold Ice Age environment be a rich grassland? The key was the climate. The vast ice sheets that covered much of North America and Europe locked up huge amounts of the world's water, making the global climate much drier than it is today. There was less snowfall in the unglaciated regions like the Yukon. The dry, sunny summers and cold, dry winters created the perfect conditions for these grasslands to thrive. This Mammoth Steppe was one of the most productive ecosystems the world has ever seen. It was the Serengeti of the Ice Age, capable of supporting an incredible biomass of large animals. It was home to the vast herds of woolly mammoths, steppe bison, wild horses, and caribou that formed the base of the food chain. And where there are vast herds of herbivores, there will be a rich diversity of powerful predators to hunt them. The discovery of a Smilodon skull this far north is a powerful confirmation of just how extensive and productive this lost world was. It tells us that the Yukon 50,000 years ago was not a barren, icy wasteland. It was a thriving grassland, a prime hunting ground teeming with life. It was a place where a large predator like a saber-toothed cat could not only survive but flourish. The skull, therefore, acts as an indicator fossil. Its very presence tells us about the wider environment. When we find a Smilodon, we know we are looking at the remains of the Mammoth Steppe ecosystem. We can begin to reconstruct this lost landscape in our minds. Vast, windswept plains stretching to the horizon, dotted with herds of giant animals, under a cold, bright sun. It is a world that has completely vanished from our planet. The end of the Ice Age saw the climate become warmer and wetter. The forests that had been confined to small southern refuges began to expand, and this encroaching tide of trees and mosses eventually replaced the vast grasslands of the Mammoth Steppe. The ecosystem that had dominated the northern hemisphere for tens of thousands of years disappeared, and with it, the incredible megafauna that it supported. The Yukon skull is a message from this vanished world, a reminder of a completely different version of our planet that once existed, a version that was perfectly suited to the life of an Ice Age apex predator. But this predator was not the only hunter on the steppe. The world of the Mammoth Steppe was a dangerous place, filled with giants. The saber-toothed cat, for all its power, was not the only major predator on the block. The Yukon skull helps us to understand that it lived as part of a complex predator guild, a community of carnivores that shared the same environment and often competed for the same food resources. Reconstructing this guild is like casting the characters in a prehistoric drama, and our Smilodon was one of the lead actors. One of its main competitors would have been the American lion, Panthera atrox. This was a true lion, closely related to the African lions of today, but it was about 25% larger, making it one of the largest cats that ever lived. While Smilodon was a heavily built ambush predator, the American lion was a more agile, pursuit-style hunter. They likely targeted similar prey, such as bison and horses, and there would have been intense competition between the two species. A pride of lions might try to steal a kill from a pride of saber-toothed cats, leading to violent, and sometimes fatal confrontations. But there was an even bigger and more terrifying predator on the landscape: the giant short-faced bear, Arctodus simus. This was the largest terrestrial carnivore of Ice Age North America, a true monster. Standing on its hind legs, it could have reached over 11 feet tall, and it weighed close to a ton. With its long legs, it was a surprisingly fast runner, and its powerful jaws could crush bone. For a long time, scientists thought the short-faced bear was a super predator, actively hunting large prey. However, more recent isotopic analysis suggests it may have been a highly specialized scavenger, or more accurately, a kleptoparasite. It would use its immense size and intimidating presence to bully other predators, like saber-toothed cats and lions, off their kills. Imagine a pride of Smilodon successfully taking down a large bison, only to have a giant short-faced bear come charging in to steal their hard-won meal. The cats would have had little choice but to back down and surrender their prize. The short-faced bear was the undisputed king, the top of the food chain. The predators on the ground were not the only threat. The sky was ruled by giant predatory birds, like the teratorns, massive vulture-like birds with wingspans of over 12 feet. They would have soared over the steppe, watching for kills and swooping down to scavenge on the remains left by the big cats. And of course, there was another, highly intelligent social predator that was beginning to make its presence felt in North America at this time: humans. These new arrivals were expert hunters, armed with sophisticated stone-tipped spears, and a level of cooperative planning that was unmatched. They were in direct competition with the saber-toothed cats for the same herds of bison and horses. The skull of the Yukon Smilodon helps us to place it within this complex and violent world. It was not a lone monster in an empty landscape. It was part of a dynamic and dangerous community. It had to compete for every meal, to defend its kills from giant bears, and to contend with rival prides of lions. It was a life of constant conflict and struggle. This picture of the ecosystem makes the saber-toothed cat's success even more impressive. To thrive for so long in such a competitive environment is a testament to its incredible adaptations and its effectiveness as a hunter. And finally, the precise age of the skull gives us one last crucial insight: a snapshot of a changing world. The fact that the Yukon skull was so perfectly preserved meant that scientists could determine its age with a high degree of precision, using radiocarbon dating. The results showed that this individual cat lived and died approximately 50,000 years ago. This date is incredibly significant because it places the cat not in the coldest, harshest part of the Ice Age, but in a period known as an interstadial. An interstadial was a temporary, warmer, and wetter phase within the larger glacial period. During these times, the great ice sheets would retreat slightly, and the climate would become more temperate for a few thousand years before plunging back into a deep freeze. Placing our Smilodon in one of these warmer periods tells us a great deal about the animal's tolerance for environmental change. It shows that saber-toothed cats were not just specialists of the extreme cold. They were adaptable enough to survive and even thrive in a range of climatic conditions, as long as their preferred habitat, the open grasslands of the mammoth steppe, remained intact. This is a crucial piece of the puzzle when we later consider the reasons for their extinction. It suggests that they were not simply killed off by a bit of warming. They were resilient animals that had weathered climate shifts before. The precise date also allows paleontologists to correlate the presence of this cat with other known environmental and faunal data from the same time period. We can look at the pollen records from lake sediments of the same age to know exactly what kinds of grasses and plants were growing. We can look at the fossils of other animals dated to the same period to build a complete and time-specific picture of the entire community. The skull ceases to be a generic Ice Age fossil and becomes a data point from Yukon 50,000 years ago. This level of precision is invaluable for scientists trying to build accurate models of past ecosystems and how they responded to climate change. These models are not just of academic interest. By understanding how a top predator like Smilodon and its entire ecosystem responded to the rapid climate shifts of the past, we can gain crucial insights into how our modern ecosystems might respond to the rapid, human-caused climate change we are experiencing today. The Yukon skull, therefore, is more than just a window into the past. It is a lesson for the future. It is a detailed snapshot of a specific moment in time, a moment when a magnificent predator roamed a lost grassland, part of a complex and vibrant world that has long since vanished, leaving behind only its frozen bones as a silent warning and a source of endless fascination. The Yukon skull has given us an unprecedented window into the life of the saber-toothed cat and the lost world of the Ice Age. We have seen the anatomy of this perfect predator, understood its brutally efficient hunting methods, and reconstructed the cold, grassy steppe it called home. For tens of thousands of years, Smilodon was a master of its environment, an apex predator at the very top of the food chain, a symbol of power and evolutionary success. And yet, today it is gone. Its entire lineage, which had survived for millions of years, vanished from the face of the earth in what was, geologically speaking, the blink of an eye. This is the final and most profound mystery of the saber-toothed cat. Why did it disappear? How could such a powerful and successful predator be driven to extinction? The answer is not a simple one. The demise of Smilodon was part of a much larger event, a mass extinction that swept across the globe at the end of the last Ice Age, wiping out most of the planet's giant animals, or megafauna. To solve this puzzle, we must now investigate the prime suspects in this prehistoric crime, exploring the powerful forces that brought the reign of the saber-toothed cat to its dramatic and sudden end. The first and most powerful of these forces was a change that affected the entire planet. The first leading theory behind the extinction of the saber-toothed cat is the familiar one in Earth's long history: climate change. The world that Smilodon was so perfectly adapted to was the world of the Pleistocene epoch, the Ice Age. It was a world of dramatic fluctuations, of long cold glacial periods punctuated by shorter, warmer interstadials, like the one our 50,000-year-old Yukon cat lived in. But around 12,000 years ago, a final dramatic and permanent shift occurred. The great ice sheets that covered much of the northern hemisphere began their final, rapid retreat. The planet entered a new, warmer and wetter geological epoch, the Holocene, the age we live in today. This was not a gentle, gradual warming. The evidence from ice cores and sediment layers shows that it was a period of wild and rapid climate instability. Temperatures could swing dramatically in the space of just a few decades. This rapid warming had a catastrophic effect on the saber-toothed cat's habitat. The vast, cold, dry grasslands of the mammoth steppe, the ecosystem that had dominated the planet for millennia, could not survive in this new, warmer, wetter world. As the glaciers retreated and rainfall patterns shifted, a new kind of environment began to take over. A predator is only as successful as its prey. The saber-toothed cat was a hyperspecialist. As the isotopic analysis of the Yukon skull showed us, its diet was almost entirely focused on the large grazing herbivores of the mammoth steppe: horses, bison, and camels. This specialization was a winning strategy for tens of thousands of years, as these animals were incredibly abundant. But specialization is a high-stakes evolutionary gamble. When your preferred food source is thriving, you thrive. But when your food source disappears, you are faced with a catastrophic crisis. This is the prey disappearance theory, and it is inextricably linked to the climate change hypothesis. As the mammoth steppe vanished, the great herds of grazers that depended on it vanished as well. The ancient horse populations of North America, once one of the most common animals on the continent, went completely extinct. The giant longhorn steppe bison were replaced by the smaller, more forest-adapted American bison we know today. Camels, which had also been a common part of the North American landscape, disappeared. The saber-toothed cat's entire menu was being wiped from the face of the continent. Faced with this collapse of its primary food source, Smilodon would have had few options. Could it have switched to hunting smaller prey, like deer or peccaries? The evidence from its anatomy suggests this would have been very difficult. Its entire body was a heavy, powerful machine built for tackling giant prey. It was too slow and heavily built to be an effective hunter of smaller, more agile forest animals. Its specialized saber teeth, so perfect for killing a giant bison, were ill-suited for hunting smaller game. It was a case of evolutionary overspecialization. The very traits that had made it so successful for so long now became a fatal liability. It was like a highly specialized factory that was designed to produce one specific product. When the market for that product collapsed, the factory was unable to retool and was forced to shut down. We can see evidence of this nutritional stress in the last saber-toothed cat fossils found at La Brea. The bones from the final period before their extinction show more signs of disease, injury, and developmental problems, classic signs of a population suffering from malnutrition. They were literally starving into extinction. The disappearance of the megafauna herds was almost certainly the primary driver of their demise. The great hunter was left with nothing to hunt. But as this environmental crisis was unfolding, a new and unprecedented pressure was being applied to the ecosystem, a pressure from a new and uniquely intelligent predator. The end of the last ice age was not just a time of dramatic climate change. It was also the time of a great human migration. Around 13,000 to 15,000 years ago, the first modern humans, known to archaeologists as the Paleo-Indians, crossed the Bering Land Bridge from Siberia into North America. These were not primitive, struggling hunter-gatherers. They were modern humans just like us, with sophisticated language, complex social structures, and a highly advanced toolkit for survival. This is the human competition factor, often called the overkill hypothesis. This theory suggests that the arrival of these expert human hunters was the final nail in the coffin for the saber-toothed cat and the other megafauna. These new predators were unlike anything the Ice Age ecosystem had ever seen before. They hunted in large, coordinated groups with a level of strategic planning that was unmatched. And they had a revolutionary new technology, the projectile point. They had developed beautifully crafted, incredibly sharp stone spearheads, such as the famous Clovis points, which they could attach to spears and throw with tremendous force and accuracy, perhaps using a spear-throwing device called an otlotl. This technology was a game-changer. It allowed them to hunt giant animals from a safe distance, minimizing the risk to the hunters. A pride of saber-toothed cats had to engage in a dangerous, close-quarters physical struggle with the giant bison. A team of human hunters could bring down the same animal with a volley of well-aimed spears from 100 feet away. The evidence for the effectiveness of these human hunters is found at archaeological sites across North America, where Clovis points are found directly associated with the bones of mammoths and bison. Humans were now directly competing with the saber-toothed cats for the exact same prey. And humans were arguably more efficient. Furthermore, humans were adaptable generalists. If the bison herds moved on, they could hunt deer, catch fish, or gather plants. The saber-toothed cat, as a specialist, could not. Some proponents of this theory go even further, suggesting that humans may have actively hunted the saber-toothed cats themselves. While direct evidence for this is scarce, it's certainly possible. A large predator like a smilodon would have been seen as a threat to human encampments and a direct competitor for food. Eliminating them would have been a logical survival strategy. The arrival of this new, incredibly intelligent, and technologically advanced predator on the scene would have placed an immense and unprecedented pressure on the already stressed populations of saber-toothed cats. Their food was disappearing due to climate change, and now they had to compete for the remaining scraps with the most successful hunter the planet has ever produced. The timing is certainly suspicious. The extinction of the megafauna across North America seems to follow the path of human migration with remarkable correlation. It seems unlikely to be a pure coincidence. So, who was the real killer? Was it the changing climate that destroyed the habitat? Was it the disappearance of the prey? Or was it the arrival of the new human superpredator? For decades, scientists debated these different theories as if they were mutually exclusive. But the modern scientific consensus is that there was no single cause. The extinction of the saber-toothed cat was not a simple murder mystery with one culprit. It was the result of a perfect storm, a catastrophic combination of all these factors hitting at the exact same time. It was a devastating 1-2-3 punch from which the great cats and the other megafauna could not recover. The process likely unfolded like this. First, the rapid climate change at the end of the Ice Age began to fundamentally alter the landscape. The vast, productive mammoth steppe began to shrink and fragment, replaced by less productive forests and tundra. This was the foundational pressure that destabilized the entire ecosystem. Second, as a direct result of this habitat loss, the great herds of herbivores, the horses, bison, and camels, began to decline drastically. Their populations crashed, leaving the highly specialized saber-toothed cats with a dwindling food supply. The predators were now facing starvation. Third, into this already stressed and collapsing ecosystem walked a new and formidable competitor: humans. These highly efficient hunters placed additional pressure on the already dwindling herbivore herds and likely targeted the predators themselves. The saber-toothed cats were now being hit from all sides. Their home was disappearing, their food was disappearing, and they were facing a new intelligent rival they could not outcompete. It was a battle for survival fought on multiple fronts, and it was a battle the saber-toothed cat was destined to lose. Its incredible specializations, the very things that had made it so successful for so long, now became its undoing. It was perfectly adapted to a world that no longer existed. The final prides of these magnificent animals would have found themselves in a desperate situation, struggling to find food in a changing landscape, their roars echoing in a world that had no place for them anymore. The extinction of Smilodon is a powerful and sobering story. It is a lesson in the fragility of even the mightiest creatures when faced with rapid environmental change. The Yukon skull, in the end, is more than just the fossil of a single animal. It is a symbol of a lost world. It is a testament to a magnificent predator that ruled the Ice Age, and a stark reminder of the powerful forces that brought its reign to an end. It is a story written in bone, a story of success, struggle, and ultimately of extinction, A final chapter in the epic of the Ice Age that serves as a profound warning for the future of our own changing planet. The Yukon skull is more than a fossil. It's a time capsule. It gives us a tangible connection to the legendary saber-toothed cat and the brutal, magnificent world it ruled. It reminds us that even the most powerful predators can vanish, leaving behind only their bones and a warning about how fragile life on our planet truly is. If the past still whispers to you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Ancient Relics Keeper, because some mysteries were never meant to be buried.